adventure. Excitement. A Jedi craves not these things.
It is seriously one of the best films of all time. It's certainly one of the best Star Wars films, despite the fact that it ends on an inconclusive note. It has a twist that nobody saw coming, and I have seen it more times than I've passed bad checks. And I'll certainly watch it again when I next get out on parole.
Who'd have thought that, huh?
The Empire Strikes Back.
Up, half-witted, scruffy-looking Nerf herder.
Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, is an absolute classic and a Star Wars sequel, which to some seems like two conflicting ideas. It's a story about discovery, friendship, love, family, the grammar, importance of, and the health benefits of instant freeze-drying.
The possibility of successfully navigating an asteroid field is approximately 3,720 to 1.
Never tell me the odds.
A lot has been written about Empire Strikes Back, so we'll try not to repeat what others have said in jest. But the story of The Empire Strikes Back is the story of The Empire Strikes Back.
How rude!
And yes, there will be spoilers in this review because guess what? While you may have seen the film dozens of times or even more, there's always somebody who's seeing The Empire Strikes Back for the first time.
Hey guys, you ever seen that really old movie, Empire Strikes Back?
There were these two siblings, you see, and they never met each other, but then they did and shared a couple of kisses. One of them was a princess and the other one was a farm boy who blew up his dad's office. But that's getting ahead of ourselves.
You have failed me for the last time.
Empire Strikes Back would be a much darker film in its tone compared to the first film. It was a film where Lucas felt safe in making it the middle part of a trilogy that itself was claimed to be the middle part of a much wider story that he'd intended to make, which could be anywhere between 9 to 12 films in total. Now that's an awful lot of yellow legal pads. I just hope Lucas talked to his dad about a bulk buy.
Understood? Yeah. Good luck.
The rebels have a hidden base on their ice planet Hoth. Meanwhile, the Empire are searching for those long-haired hippie freedom lovers far and wide. Darth Vader has his own search. He's looking for that pesky Luke Skywalker for reasons that will become blindingly obvious in the future. On Hoth, Luke is attacked by a creature, manages to use his limited force powers to save himself from a Wampa before he becomes the main ingredient in a Wampa fondue party. In his delirious state, Luke sees a vision of his mentor, his dead mentor, Obi-Wan Kenobi, who's now a spooky quest giver, telling Luke to go to the Dagobah system to be trained as a Jedi. But until he finds the planet on his own, he will not be able to fast travel there. Han Solo rescues Luke from freezing to death, but then Leia is a mite upset that Han wants to leave, while Han Solo wants Leia to admit that she has caught feelings for him.
Afraid I was gonna leave without giving you a goodbye kiss?
I just assumed he's a Wookiee.
I can arrange that.
Just then, and to the relief of everybody who's seen the next movie, the Empire attacks and everyone runs after the planet is evacuated. Han and Chewie take Leia and C-3PO in the Falcon and run from the Imperials chasing them, while Luke heads for the swamp planet of Dagobah to train with Yoda, a wizened ancient Jedi Master who also seems to be a personal trainer, imploring Luke to bust through the pain barrier, but at no point does he try to sell supplements to Luke.
But tell me why I can't.
No, there is no why.
After an extended chase by the Empire, Han and Leia finally kiss when they are 3PO blocked, and the Falcon will eventually land on Cloud City for repairs. The city's administrator is the same rogue that used to own the Millennium Falcon before losing it in a card game to Han Solo. Lando Calrissian is a smooth charmer and a scoundrel who's found respectability in his new job.
Yeah, I'm responsible.
Though, not that respectable. Without realizing it, Leia has brought her new boyfriend to meet her dad. Of course, no one knew that at the time. It was likely to be an awkward enough dinner as it was.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Vader having tortured and imprisoned Leia and made her watch as her adopted parents' planet was destroyed. The only way it would be any more awkward is if Leia told Vader about this. So, maybe they should just stick to small talk about Bespin's weather. Han is tortured by the Imperials as a way to draw in Luke, who gives up his training to rescue his friends, and not even the ghost of Obi-Wan's past can dissuade Luke from his mission. It's one of those missions where you have to tie up all the loose ends before heading off to face the final boss. Han is frozen in carbonite as a test to make sure the same process won't kill Luke. He's then handed over to the bounty hunter Boba Fett, who at this stage was the coolest thing since somebody put sliced bread in a refrigerator. So take the coolest character in Star Wars, Han Solo, then freeze him, then add Boba Fett, and then you can see why Fett's ship, Slave One, is officially the coolest place in the universe. And here's the big twist warning, the last warning. The Jedi dropout Luke shows up to face off against Vader, who turns out to be a really hands-off dad. I mean, literally.
I am your father.
Lando helps Leia and company escape, but they're too late to stop Boba Fett flying off with Han Solo. But Luke is recovered, well, most of him, and the Falcon escapes from the Empire. Just. Luke Skywalker regains the ability to show appreciation at a concert, while Lando and Chewie set off to find Han, despite everybody knowing exactly where he's going. And this is possibly one of the most important parts of the entire film. This is the first time that the planet that Luke grew up on was actually mentioned on screen.
I'll meet you at the rendezvous point on Tatooine.
Alright, it's maybe not that important. To be continued.
I have a bad feeling about this.
Yeah.
Empire Strikes Back has to continue on from Star Wars in a way that doesn't negate the palpable Rebel victory and open up new story threads. Luke's father, Luke possibly having a sibling, rescuing Han, Vader hunting for Luke when the Emperor sees the lad as a threat, that sort of thing. George Lucas was now in a position where he might possibly be able to make all of those Star Wars films that he had in his mind.
Typical. Come on.
So, while Star Wars was in production, expectations for that film finding any sort of success were muted at best. George Lucas had in mind a much smaller scale and cheaper to produce follow-up movie, and so he hired Alan Dean Foster to write it. Star Wars was released in May of 1977, and within a year had become the highest grossing movie of all time. This was still an era when sequels usually made less money than the first film, but there was such an incredibly strong demand for more Star Wars adventures. So the idea of a low-budget sequel didn't seem like the right way to go.
What do you mean?
So it's the same old story. Order hamburgers and make sure you order enough fries for everyone. There's nothing worse than someone says, I don't want fries, and then they spend the entire meal bumming them from you, and in the end, nobody has enough fries. I mean, Jeff, if you just wanted fries, why the hell didn't you just order some fries for yourself? George Lucas learned that lesson. Don't be Jeff. He was going to make a big sequel and order enough fries for everybody.
Good.
Straight cut, crinkle cut, curly fries, dirty fries, sweet potato fries, and just to make absolutely sure, onion rings.
May the Force be with you.
Alan Dean Foster's story was instead published in 1978 as Splinter of the Mind's Eye, while George Lucas set to work on a proper big sequel. In the meantime, though, such was the demand for more Star Wars adventures, George Lucas allowed this to happen.
The Star Wars Holiday Special.
The Star Wars Holiday Special was a variety special set in the Star Wars universe where Carrie Fisher, Mark Hamill, and Harrison Ford discovered that there was indeed a lower floor to the quality of Star Wars writing.
Yes, it's a crime, friend.
The Holiday Special has been disowned by just about everybody involved with it, to the point where the conspiracy of silence could almost be a plot point in a horror film.
I don't want to type the channels.
Its reason for existing was purely to keep Star Wars in the minds of people in the years before a sequel was ready, especially if those people were buying Kenner's toys.
What happened?
For his sequel, though, George Lucas would have to start from scratch. He'd always had in mind a much grander story where the very first Star Wars movie was meant to be just one small chapter in the middle of that, saga.
What are you talking about?
After thinking about what he had committed himself to doing, he got out his yellow legal pad and set about outlining a story. The new film would be called The Empire Strikes Back, or more accurately, Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Now, George Lucas had wanted a similar chapter number in the title of Star Wars, but the feeling at the time was that the audiences would find it confusing. Empire Strikes Back was the first numbered Star Wars, Episode 5, and a 1981 re-release of Star Wars would become Episode 4, A New Hope. Lucas had always intended to fill in the numerical gaps. It would just take a little longer than he'd at first planned. I'm the same. I had planned to empty the kitchen bin last month, but I've just gotten so used to the smell of dank eggshells.
I know I could have.
The new Star Wars film was not going to be made the same way. Firstly, it was expected to be a hit, so there was a lot of pressure to make certain that it was a big hit. Secondly, Lucas had decided that he would outline the story and produce the movie, but hire others to write and direct. And thirdly, he'd finance the film himself by going and getting a loan from a bank, the Bank of America. Hey, are you sucking in air through your teeth, or did you just slash my tires? Meanwhile, Star Wars distributor 20th Century Fox had been on a high after Star Wars had rejuvenated its formerly beaten up stock price, and so they desperately wanted to have the next Star Wars film. George Lucas had made a smart gamble, where he had retained most of the rights to merchandising and sequels in his deal for the first film. So now, George Lucas was dictating terms, whereby Lucasfilm would pay for the film and Fox would merely distribute it on terms that favoured Lucas. Within the studio, this was quite controversial since A, studios are loath to cede power to creatives, B, studios loath to give money to anyone, and C, it played into the ongoing behind-the-scenes power struggles inside the studio.
Well, that was a long time ago. I'm sure he's forgotten about that.
George Lucas wanted control over his films, and he also wanted to get away from having to do the bulk of his work in Los Angeles. He began by buying property in San Francisco and in Marin County to the city's north. Star Wars would eventually bring in a lot of money to Lucas from his share of the film's profits, but in the latter half of 1977 and throughout 1978, very little had actually filtered through to him. The windfall from merchandising was also some way down the track. So Lucas was building his empire based on future projected income. I once tried this tactic with a car loan application when I was working as a pizza delivery driver. I told the loans manager, look, I really needed a newer and faster car so that I could start delivering hot pizza. A Star Wars sequel was considered a slam dunk success, and so the bank had little hesitation in giving Lucasfilm a loan. George Lucas's dream was to eventually set up his HQ in a new facility that would become known as Skywalker Ranch. He wanted to simplify the way films were made, so over time he'd invest in research into computer-based video editing, computer-based sound editing, computer graphics, and video games. But he also had to work out what he was going to do with his LA-based visual effects company, Industrial Light and Magic. After Star Wars had wrapped production, ILM was more or less disbanded, with Star Wars effects supervisor John Dykstra hiring most of the crew and renting ILM's facilities from Lucas while they worked on Battlestar Galactica under Dykstra's Apogee banner. For Empire Strikes Back, Lucas wanted to reconstitute ILM away from Los Angeles and would set up a new facility in San Francisco. A select group of ILM staffers were offered positions in the new facility in San Francisco while they spooled up for the next Star Wars film. There was also the legal question of Battlestar Galactica itself, where Lucas and 20th Century Fox felt that, the legal term was that Galactica was a ripoff of Star Wars, so they sent in the Stormtrooper lawyers to get it stopped. There was sort of an agreement whereby Galactica would make some minor concessions, but anyway, Dykstra's company only provided effects for Galactica's initial episodes before Universal moved the effects in-house. Then there was the pesky matter of a script. George Lucas hated writing and felt that he was not all that great at it. And for the Star Wars sequel, he went with veteran screenwriter Lee Brackett. She turned in one draft that Lucas wasn't entirely happy with, but she was also ill and soon passed away. Lucas wrote a second draft, but the script still needed work. Lucas had already been developing Raiders of the Lost Ark, and tapped that film's screenwriter, Lawrence Kasdan, to provide another draft which would concentrate on making the film's dialogue work better. While George Lucas hated writing, he absolutely despised the process of physically directing a movie. He had found directing the first film physically and emotionally draining, much like catching up with my school chum, Freddie, who would start every catch-up with a few minutes of stories of him driving around in a van with some pals and their dog solving crimes, but then he would spend the next 3 hours going into incredibly icky detail about how often he's forced to hose out the back of the van. Lucasfilm began a search for a new director. Getting somebody to direct the sequel to the most successful movie of all time sounds like it would be, fairly easy to do. It's the sort of opportunity that nobody would pass up, but that proved not to be the case. Lucas eventually offered the gig to Irvin Kershner, somebody Lucas knew from when Kershner lectured at the University of Southern California. Kershner was hired because he was unflappable when things got tough on set, and also because Kershner would direct the movie properly. Lucas had also wanted a new producer, as he wasn't 100% satisfied with Gary Kurtz's work on Star Wars, but in the end, Kurtz stayed on to oversee Empire. Well, for the time being.
Be like what?
Like we're being watched.
With that out of the way, you had to make the film. The first film's locations were in Tunisia, where the shoot was beset by mechanical issues, bad weather, and extreme temperatures. So for The Empire Strikes Back, they wanted something completely different. So the production chose Finse in Norway, where they were beset by mechanical issues, bad weather, and extreme temperatures. It's a bit like working with my mate Dickhead Dave, where he's very cold and remote and very difficult to get any work done. Despite the difficulties, the Norwegian locations looked fantastic on film.
Watch this.
Watch what?
The rest of the production would be filmed at EMI Elstree Studios, though just before production was to begin, Stanley Kubrick was already over schedule filming The Shining at the facility before a fire destroyed a soundstage. The knock-on effect would see Empire Strikes Back's production schedule take a hit. Irvin Kershner had agreed with George Lucas in the areas where Kersh had jurisdiction for most of the shoot, and Lucas was apparently fine with that. Kershner, however, was a different director, somebody who would spend more time working with their actors on their performances. If you want to see why The Empire Strikes Back has the best and most consistent acting of all 6 films produced by George Lucas, then that's mainly down to Irvin Kershner's direction and, of course, Lawrence Kasdan's script. But that sort of work took longer, compared to, say, George Lucas, who attempted to dash out every scene in as fewer takes as possible.
You certainly have a way with people.
So the studio fire, the resultant delays, various difficulties with getting sets constructed in time, and Kershner's way of working all contributed to Empire going wildly over schedule. However, with George Lucas leveraged to the beard, money was running out and the banks were getting antsy, and that's not just because somebody had dribbled ice cream all over the carpet in summer. Empire's initial budget was $8 million, which is a lot of scratch in anybody's book, unless you're trying to make a sequel to the biggest movie of all time. But as time went on, that initial estimate was looking about as realistic as the chroma key in The Tomorrow People.
You're making a mess.
Towards the end of production, they were running out of money, and Lucasfilm had to refinance their loans with another bank and make some concessions so that Fox would guarantee the new loan.
This deal is getting worse all the time.
If Empire Strikes Back wasn't a huge success, Lucasfilm would be in deep poodoo. At this point, George Lucas quietly replaced Gary Kurtz as producer, with Howard Kazanjian stepping in to finish the shoot.
We have spotted Imperial Walker.
All through production, there would be new effects challenges to sort out. The space sequence. Now, you'd think they wouldn't be too hard, they had that sorted on the first film, but having the Millennium Falcon running from the Imperial fleet in front of hundreds of fast-moving asteroids turned into a major effects sequence. The Hoth sequences would turn out to be just as difficult, where you've got compositing of light-coloured vehicles against snowy backdrops, which came with its own challenges, such as slightly transparent snow speeders. Some effects were handled in a more old-school way. Animators Phil Tippett and John Berg created many scenes using stop motion, from long shots of Tauntauns to the Imperial Walkers. The Tauntaun took several designs before everybody was happy with the results. The Wampa, too, was redesigned for pickup shots. The Imperial Walkers, or AT-AT or AT-AT, appear from a desire to have the Hoth battle be different from spaceships or tanks. In story terms, they're there because the Rebel base is shielded from attack from above, but their original inspiration was the Martian war machines from H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds novel. They would become an iconic Star Wars design. In a galaxy where wheels were for suckers, the walkers were achieved mostly through stop motion, though there are some photographic cutouts for background walkers. And of course there was the AT-ST, nicknamed the Chicken Walker, which was just something to put together for fun. The Rebels have their own technology, but their most effective weapon was the ion cannon, which is really just a giant taser to temporarily disable Imperial ships. But, just don't talk to me about tasers. I've got too many bad memories from working the door at Wiggles concerts.
I hope you know what you're doing.
Yeah, me too.
Even after the film was completed and had premiered, Lucas felt the ending was a little ambiguous, and so ILM quickly put together 3 shots of the Rebel fleet, and these shots were spliced into any existing prints that were being shown in theatres. I don't know if this counts as a day one patch. While we've talked a lot about the miniatures, let's stop to talk about the 2D imagery. Like the first film, pre-production on Empire began with artist Ralph McQuarrie's concept art paintings. The film itself would be full of matte paintings to sell illusions of Hoth, the swamp planet Dagobah, the Star Destroyer bridges, and were used quite effectively to give life to Cloud City.
R2-D2, you know better than to trust a strange computer.
And then there was the Jedi Master.
Jedi Master? Yoda. You seek Yoda.
Yoda may have been a 900-year-old Jedi Master, but he was shorter than a Las Vegas marriage.
Judge me by my size, do you?
The decision to kill off Obi-Wan in the first film was made very late in the day during filming, and so Yoda was created for this film to fill the role of Luke's mentor. Lucas and company initially didn't want a puppet, but the alternatives were equally dodgy. Was Yoda going to be a fully stop-motion character, or was he going to be played by a child or a little person? Lucas talked to Muppet creator Jim Henson about how Yoda could be achieved, and surprise surprise, Henson suggested a puppet, and he also suggested Lucasfilm hire his colleague from The Muppet Show and Sesame Street, Frank Oz.
Do or do not. There is no try.
Oz had been the puppeteer and voices behind Grover, Cookie Monster, Miss Piggy and Fozzie Bear, but he was also interested in directing, where after a number of puppet-based productions he would go on to direct Little Shop of Horrors, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, Bowfinger and Death at a Funeral. Yoda was ultimately voiced by Frank Oz. He was also the main puppeteer, where he had a number of assistants operating the ears, the eyes and his hands. It was a remarkable performance in that it's very easy to get lost and forget that you're watching a puppet.
Help you, I can. Yes.
As for Yoda's unique way of speaking, there's no truth to the rumour that the guy holding up the cue cards on set had mixed them up. George Lucas felt that people would better remember Yoda's words if he spoke unusually. Hence, it's quite possible he asked the guy holding up the cue cards to give them a good shuffle. The film's major twist was a closely guarded secret, but extra precautions were needed. Star Wars was such a phenomenon that ILM would regularly find people diving in their trash bins to collect film offcuts and props. Likewise, journalists would attempt to enter the film's sets to get scoops. However, the biggest source of leaks? The man inside the Darth Vader costume, Dave Prowse. He had quite the mouth on him, where he would attend conventions and basically blab anything and everything. When there was an audit of where leaks came from, it was invariably Dave Prowse, whose loose lips might have explained the Titanic had time travel been more widely available in the late 70s. Prowse, of course, did not provide the voice of Vader, but did have to say something on set. And so, to combat his talkative nature, he was given dummy lines that may or may not have gone along these lines.
Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Oh, you're just taking the piss.
The biggest twist was such a tightly guarded secret that until the very end of the film, only a select number of cast and crew were given any guidance that the big reveal was in fact that Obi-Wan was Luke's Jedi daddy. Of course, once the film came out, word would spread relatively fast in pre-internet days. But spoiling a major plot twist in a movie took a lot more effort. Back in the day, if you wanted to spoil Empire Strikes Back for others, you'd have to take out ads in newspapers and do it in every paper in every city in order for the spoilage to spread far and wide enough for your extremely childish pettiness to have seemed worth the effort. The Emperor made his debut, though of course he was originally played by an actress with monkey eyes superimposed, don't ask, and dubbed by actor Clive Revill. The special editions would pop in Ian McDiarmid's version of the Emperor to better fit in with Return of the Jedi. Vader again was the main villain, though this is the only film where his every move wasn't micromanaged by a superior. Vader wants to capture Luke rather than kill him, and perhaps turn him to the dark side, either as another underling for the Emperor, or perhaps for a father-son team to depose Palpatine. As the big bad for this film, Vader gets a sweet new ride, a super star destroyer known as the Executor. Being posted to Vader's flagship sounds like it'd be a cool gig, until you realise the ship is named for Vader's favourite prank to play on his staff.
Apology accepted, Captain Nida.
James Earl Jones reprised his role as the voice of Darth Vader.
And together we can rule the galaxy as father and son.
Now, Darth Vader, despite the gift from Secret Santa, does actually turn out to be the worst boss in the galaxy, where he chokes any number of minions to death for reasons best described as trivial. It's very easy to have a bad day when you're in a military organisation, but working in the Empire is never presented as anything more than utterly soul-crushing, and more literally, esophagus-crushing. I mean, the avenues for advancement are there, but they only exist thanks to literal dead men's boots. The pay would have to be pretty good, but if your employment with the Empire is suddenly terminated at the whim of your supervisor, you are not going to have time to dash out even a Glassdoor review before you turn purple. Despite the character having died in the first film, George Lucas still wanted a Force Ghost version of Obi-Wan to appear in the sequel. Securing the services of Sir Alec Guinness was a long, drawn-out process. For one, Guinness told the production that problems with his eyes would make working under the bright lights of a film set difficult. The role might have to be recast, but relatively late in the day, terms were reached and a spectral Obi-Wan was back in the film. The road to Guinness's participation was a long and winding one, but with a bit of imagination and some primo bullshit, the story goes like this. Sir Alec Guinness was in the pub with the creator of the mini Sir Alec Isogonus, but an argument broke out after Sir Alec Guinness drank Sir Alec's Guinness. "That's my Guinness, Sir Alec." "No, my name's Sir Alec Guinness." "Yes, but that's my Guinness, Sir Alec." "No, my name's Sir Alec Guinness." And then to cut a long story short, that's how two Knights of the Realm were banned from Wetherspoons for life, allowing Guinness to appear in The Empire Strikes Back. Either that, or they just agreed on money.
So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
Carrie Fisher, Mark Hamill and Harrison Ford were back, now receiving much larger paydays this time around. Mark Hamill had been in a bad car wreck after principal photography had wrapped on the first film, and had required extensive surgery on his face. For a while, Lucas thought about adding some sort of story explanation as to why Luke looked slightly different, which I totally understand. For years I had to explain to customs officials why I no longer had a goatee and devil's horns like my passport photo, and I just tried to explain that my young nephew had found a Sharpie. Misunderstandings, especially misunderstandings around accents, are a fact of life. I once mentioned to my friend Pete that one day I'd like to meet Mark Hamill, and then Pete invited me over to meet his mother, Mrs. Hamill.
Maybe I'm just going crazy.
Luke Skywalker is no longer the kid looking for adventures, but somebody who feels the weight of expectation where he has to be a Jedi. Han Solo has found himself with a price on his head and is looking to scarper, while Leia believes Han is an asset to the rebellion. Really, it's the pair dancing around their feelings for each other like two nuns awkwardly practicing the lambada for the convent's first and probably last talent show. During filming, Marcia Lucas had a quiet chat with Carrie Fisher when her partying had begun affecting her work. Harrison Ford was on a one film at a time sort of contract, and so there was a very big question as to whether he'd be around for a third movie. Hence, Han Solo is frozen and shipped off to wherever they needed the character to be if Ford chose not to return. A big part of the film is Han and Leia's romance, where Fisher and Ford sell the couple's blooming relationship. This is where we have to give thanks to Grogu that it was Irvin Kershner directing this. One of the film's many iconic lines was an ad-lib by Harrison Ford.
I love you.
I know.
Ford was famous or infamous or notorious for his opinions of Star Wars scripts, and often his solution was to simply ignore what was in the script. I'm pretty much the same. This video has been meticulously researched and a script put together by a crack team of scriptwriters. But since I left my reading glasses on the train, I'm just making this up as I go along. Empire, that's the one where Spock comes back to life, right?
Having trouble with your droid? No. No problem. Why?
A new character, Lando Calrissian, was a smoother, more polished version of Han Solo.
Hello, what have we here?
Billy D. Williams is perfect in the role, where he's never quite what he seems. He's an administrator, a traitor, and then a hero. He is, at various times, all of the above. Anthony Daniels, Kenny Baker, Peter Mayhew, and Dave Prowse were back in their respective roles. And then there were all of the British character actors who were familiar to viewers of UK-made television series. So Michael Sheard, Ken Colley, Julian Glover, Michael Culver, John Hollis, and as Boba Fett, Jeremy Bulloch. Bulloch also played an Imperial officer in one scene. They weren't all British. Bruce Bower never orders a Waldorf salad. And Cliff Clavin himself appears, John Ratzenberger. Though the last two, who, despite being from North America, seem to be dubbed by other voiceover artists. Denis Lawson again returned as Wedge Antilles. And again, he didn't meet the rest of the cast.
Bounty hunters. We don't need that scum.
Yes, sir.
Empire did not have a large number of new alien creatures, but the closest we got to an analogue of the Cantina scene was a briefing of the bounty hunters. There's IG-88, Dengar, Bosk, Zuckuss, Forlom, and of course, Boba Fett. Fett was initially based on the idea of a super stormtrooper, but later just became a Mandalorian whose silhouette was modelled loosely on Clint Eastwood's character from The Man with No Name trilogy. Fett was introduced to the world as part of the animated sequence in the holiday special and as a Kenner action figure.
I am Boba Fett.
Now, take note. He would never, ever, ever, ever be as cool as he was in The Empire Strikes Back, where he was this mysterious figure that said very little and everybody built up in their minds as the biggest badass in the galaxy. Instead, he would turn out to be the dumbest dumbass in the galaxy.
I don't know where you get your delusions, laser brain.
Laugh it up, fuzzball.
John Williams returned to provide a score, but rather than just constantly quote his score from the first film, Empire Strikes Back manages to one-up the music from the first movie, with marvelous cues for the asteroid chase, a theme for Yoda, and of course the Imperial March, which is a piece of music that puts a chill down my spine faster than somebody dropping a block of dry ice down the back of my shirt. There were new costumes for most of the cast, cold weather uniforms for the Imperials and the Rebels, utilitarian outfits for Luke, and more elegant attire for Cloud City scenes. But when we're talking about John Mollo's costumes, what's the story with Han's coat? It's brown, but it often looks blue in most shots thanks to the lighting and the color grading, but it's brown. Of course, the toys were blue, but don't let that influence you. He's wearing a brown coat. I mean, it does look like it's brown in some scenes and blue in some scenes. Now, I could have sworn that it was blue, but it's not. It's brown. Just looks blue. But no, it's brown. The Empire Strikes Back was released in May of 1980. And again, it was an instant smash. While it didn't quite make as much money as the first film, it still did incredibly well. Despite the final budget of around $30 million and all of Lucas's worries about whether the film was going to be successful or not, Empire Strikes Back brought in around $200 million from its original US release. I mean, that was down on the first film, but it was still by far the biggest release of 1980. With various re-releases, Empire has brought in around $500 million. which is still $500 million more than I made from my low-budget fan film, The Backstrike Empire. Despite Empire Strikes Back opening around my way 6 months later, I still saw it 3 times in the cinema in the original run, and again for the special edition, making Empire Strikes Back the Star Wars film that I personally have seen most often in a cinema. As a kid though, Empire was not up there with the original since it wasn't wall-to-wall blaster battles. But it grows on you as one of the few Star Wars sequels that doesn't feel like it's pulling its punches in order to appeal to kids. And as I've gotten older, my appreciation of The Empire Strikes Back has risen to the point where I do agree with the common but not universal sentiment that Empire is by far the best one of the lot, at least top 3, which is nice because as a Star Wars fan, I love Star Wars. Just give it to me for the rest of my life. Maybe not that one. Empire's glowing reception wasn't entirely universal. For example, a Star Wars fanzine shut down after Empire Strikes Back release because the zine's publishers felt that the new film completely ruined what was so good about Star Wars. Apparently the holiday special was fine, but Empire, ew. So the more things change, the more they stay the same. So while I may not agree with their assessment regarding Empire as the straw that broke the camel's back, I applaud their decision to let it go once they realised that Star Wars was just not for them. It's so refreshing to see lapsed fans moving on, rather than making a career about how much they hate something.
I thought they smelled bad on the outside.
However, in more sane circles, Empire has become beloved not just by Star Wars fans or people who call themselves Star Wars fans or science fiction fans, but of movie fans in general. For very good reason. It has some of the best acting and dialogue of the entire series, some of the best direction. It feels like something made for grown-ups, not just for kids and insecure man-children with stunted emotional growth. It's a film that goes darker and yet had a lot of heart to it. It doesn't have to end with a massive explosion of a planet killer or, thankfully, go anywhere near a desert planet.
This one goes there, that one goes there, right?
Like the other films of the original trilogy, Empire Strikes Back received a cleaned-up special edition in 1997. Of the 3 films, Empire's special edition manages to make the smallest number of changes, with a few restored scenes of the Wampa, swapping in Ian McDiarmid's Emperor, redubbing Boba Fett, enhancements to Cloud City scenes, and some re-editing of the finale, but in general features the least egregious changes of all 3 special editions. Empire Strikes Back was, and is, one of the greatest sequels of all time. Of course, 3 years later, George Lucas would be back to wrap up his Star Wars saga in what was originally going to be called Revenge of the Jedi. If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
Exterior Hoth, a little spy robot thingy, zips through the atmosphere.